recently, so I reached out to May and I asked if you guys were planning on doing an episode on sexual assault. It's something I can speak on personally, but I thought it was really relevant to bring up as an episode because I really loved and cherished my time in LH, and that will never change. But now that I've left and I've recently started grappling with like my trauma from my sexual assaults, it's really been affecting the way I'm able to remember my time, and I just don't want anyone else to leave LH with that same like burden and kind of discomfort, like retrospective discomfort. So yeah, that's why I thought it would be a good topic.
My name is Leesa. I'm a rising 4A from Sciencespo, and I am a survivor of sexual assault.
One has always thought that this place is a safe haven. Walking along the docks to the campus, leaving the campus with the sky dyed orange, pink, and purple, going to the beach for the sunset. With a campus of around 300 people, a tight-knit community at the tip of Normandy, a group that one would have always relied on. What could possibly happen?
Hey, how are you guys?
Hi, Leesa. Yeah, we're good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm in New York as like for my 3A and 4A because I'm in the Columbia dual degree. But yeah, so I miss LH, but things are good in New York. Yeah.
Leesa is currently a 4A in the dual degree program between Sciencespo and Columbia University. During her time on the LEAP campus, she is very active in all sorts of campus events and initiatives. She's a proper member and the female football team leader. She's also one of the core members of the SOS team, a student body that focuses on the mental well-being of students on campus. She's also passionate about environmentalism. As an editor for the campus magazine, she's also outspoken on topics related to sexual assaults.
Yeah, so I want the publication of this episode to start a real conversation on campus that will hopefully change the dangerous culture that persists and on our campus, not just on our campus, but like in the world, unfortunately. And it's a culture that specifically exonerates people who assault and harass and rape, puts the burden on people who experience this violence to speak out, and it also trivializes their trauma when they do speak out. So yeah, I don't want this episode to just be like clickbait or like, you know, as you see people that you might know from campus talking about a really personal thing. I want it to be something that like actually shifts a concrete change on campus that will make people safer and make people understand this issue, because I think we all have like an idea that like sexual assault is bad and you shouldn't do it, but like even me myself for 2 years after being assaulted, I didn't even understand what that meant. So I want this episode to really inform people, but go a step further than informing, but actually make them change. When I had this really sudden like flashback, I realized that like there was something wrong there, and that was like in October, and since then I've asked myself like how do I even talk about this, because like I'm not gonna send like a fucking like email blast to like all of Sciencespo like this person assaulted me, but I still feel like I need to talk about it somehow, because for me it's like a form of like justice, like that person's been able to live his life for like just fine knowing what he did, whereas like I've had to suffer through like a lot of trauma.
I've been sexually assaulted twice. Both occurred during my first year at Sciencespo. One of my assaulters was a classmate and formerly very close friend from Sciencespo. It happened during the way of my 1A. Essentially, in my bungalow of 6 friends, we were sort of tight on space, and so a bunch of us had to like share beds, share couches to sleep on, and I had to share a bed with the person who assaulted me, as well as another female friend. So it was my female friend, the person who assaulted me, and then myself. And I think it was on the first night of Way. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I think I was sober at that point. And I feel some movement next to me, but I thought someone was just sort of turning in bed while they were sleeping, so I tried to fall back asleep. I closed my eyes. And then the person who assaulted me, my very close friend at the time, and throughout my 2 years at Sciencespo, they started moving their body closer to me, like alongside my body while I was sleeping. I was on my back, my eyes were closed. At least from the outside, looked like I was sleeping. And I started to feel extremely uncomfortable and scared as they started moving toward me, and I remember their arm like coming across me and touching me, and I was terrified. I couldn't even move, and I kept my eyes closed and hoped that if I pretended to keep sleeping that it would stop, but it didn't stop. It probably went on for maybe a minute. It's hard to say now because it's been almost 3 years, and I spent most of the past 3 years trying to forget about it, but what I do remember vividly was my sense of fear and frozenness and total helplessness in that situation. And I just kept my eyes closed the entire time, and I'm sure I was physically tense, that I was showing no desire for this sexual advance or whatever this was to be happening to me. And I might have been crying, I'm not sure. But all I know is that there was no explicit, like verbal or non-verbal consent at all. This happened to me when I was sleeping. And yeah, I didn't say anything. I didn't tell anyone because it wasn't clear to me at the time that it was a sexual assault. I thought, this is my friend, I was sleeping. There was someone else in the bed with us. This was during a way, so it's supposed to be a happy time. And I also felt that if I did tell someone, even if I didn't frame it as a sexual assault, but rather just a weird incident, that I would be labeled as overreacting or sort of like a party pooper, that I was trying to ruin what was supposed to be a really fun time. And so I just stayed silent. And the way I coped with it at the time was just trying to forget about it. And that's what allowed me to stay very close friends with that person for 2 years. And a few days before I began to have my own real realization that I had been assaulted, not once but twice, because up to this point I knew that I had been assaulted another time. I was speaking to a friend, and she told me for the first time that she had been sexually assaulted in Le Havre. And I was the only person she had told up to that point. And hearing her really affected me. And I think after that, after she told me that on the weekend, I just began thinking about it. It was just sort of on my mind. And I remember Monday, I was getting ready to go to class, and suddenly I had an extremely vivid flashback to the other sexual assault, not the one that occurred during my way, but the one that occurred at another time during my 1A. And that sexual assault, I identified it as sexual assault at the time, but just like the other one that happened at my way, I blocked it out of my mind. I didn't think about it. And so for me to have such a vivid flashback where I could see everything and feel everything was really odd. And I didn't conjure it up myself. It just sort of came to me. And in this flashback, I felt like the physiological feelings that I had during the assault, like the heart racing, the sense of like paralyzing fear coming over me, and even talking about it now is bringing it back a bit. And as I was having this flashback, it occurred to me in that moment that I didn't feel this only one time, that I had felt it twice. The other time being during the way. And I was really overwhelmed. I was really confused because I'd never seen it that way. Up to that point, I had thought what had happened in my way was just a weird moment, a misunderstanding, and maybe something that I was even partially responsible for if I had like let on that person. And after calming down, because it was just a wave of panic and anxiety, I actually messaged this friend former friend who assaulted me during the way. And I said to them, hey, I hope you're doing well. I sort of recounted the incident in general details, and I said, I know you didn't mean any harm, but you made me feel really scared and uncomfortable. And I'm telling you this now, not because I'm mad, but because I don't want you to make someone else feel this way again. First of all, I had just begun to process these things, and so I wasn't angry at the time, but later, as I began to realize how much they affected me, which I'll explain in a moment, I was very angry. and it was not okay what they did, so I let them off way too easy. Anyway, they responded with that message a few minutes later saying, acknowledging that they remembered exactly what happened, and they added that I had hoped that was just a fever dream, meaning they remembered exactly what they did, what they had done, and that it was wrong, and they hadn't said anything to me in 2 years of friendship. I think I can safely assume that part of that, if not all of that, was because they feared any consequence for their actions. And so instead of having a speck of integrity and apologizing and taking responsibility for the trauma that they caused me, they stayed silent and pretended to be my friend for 2 years. And that's part of the problem of sexual assault that many survivors can relate to, is that we pay the consequence for someone else's actions. That we have to live with what they did, whereas they can just separate themselves from it and distance themselves from it. But to return to my story, they had apologized for what they did. I thought that was enough at the time, but that was in about mid-late October, and from then I just went downhill. My entire first semester at Columbia was sort of ruined by the trauma I went through. Over the next couple of weeks, I started feeling pretty strong symptoms of, I guess what you could call like PTSD or resurfacing trauma. I was constantly anxious for the rest of my semester. There was about a month long, if not a bit longer, period where I had panic attacks every single day and had to miss a lot of class, and even had to get some final papers and exams pushed back as a result. I felt really depressed. I felt worthless. It was so much for me to realize that I had not been sexually assaulted not just once but twice, and that one of the times was by someone who I'd considered a close friend of mine, someone that I deeply cared about for 2 years, and I thought they cared about me too, and so I felt worthless. I felt used, like a piece of trash. That two people could see me, that could reduce me and my humanity enough down where they were able to disrespect me and harm me like that. And of course I know now that that's not my fault and the wrongdoing is on them, but that doesn't take away from many survivors of sexual assault's stolen feeling of respect and humanity and ownership of their own bodies. And I was terrified after. It was hard for me. I sort of generalized the trauma of those sexual assault incidents to the point where whenever I would hear discussions about sexual assault, which is pretty frequent with the frequency with how often it happens, it would feel really triggering and overwhelming to me. I sometimes had to step out of class because it would be too much. I was afraid sometimes to walk in the streets. I would always assume that something bad would happen to me. And I had to start going to therapy pretty regularly with a therapist who specializes in sexual assault trauma and who confirmed to me when I recounted what happened to me that is sexual assault. That sexual assault doesn't matter it doesn't depend on whether you know this person, that they're your friend, whether you were wearing something or you had been drinking. It doesn't matter where you are. But that what made it a sexual assault was that I did not consent to this, and that my sense of trauma after would testify to that stolen feeling of safety. I did not feel like I had a support system on campus that I could go to for help after my sexual assaults, and I know from firsthand, from having conversations with other people, that I'm not the only one that feels that way. Sexual assault is, of course, a societal issue, a global issue that isn't exclusive to college campuses, but of course universities have a specific responsibility to try to protect their students because of how frequently it happens on campuses, but also in how historically and even today they have protected sexual assaulters by not punishing them, by hiring them, by protecting them in other ways. And so at Sciencespo, at least in my experience, the only time that we were taught about sexual assault and what consent meant in my 1A was during an assembly with the BDE. And I don't even think everyone was attending. Definitely not everyone was very engaged because it was handled in not a very serious way. I'm not going to fault that entirely to the BDE itself, because the fact that Sciencespo and the administration could trust a group of students to lead such an important conversation is ridiculous. That is primarily a fault of administration to give that huge responsibility that is really difficult to unpack for people to a group of students. And in fact, my sexual assaulter was a member of the next year's BDE, which will just show that this should not be a legitimate body to be handling this conversation. And so I remember we watched a video on consent as T. There was some sort of comical way to handle a rather heavy issue in a light manner, but my point is it was not handled seriously, and that was our only formal discussion on what consent means. And I know that rape and sexual assault happens on our campus. I know because people tell me, I know because it happened to me, and I know because I can hear from conversations and the way people talk about women and sexual assault that rape culture is rampant on our campus. So I didn't feel support at all from the BDE nor the admin because they didn't handle this issue seriously, and the fault of that is mostly on the administration because they're the ones who should be responsible for this. Another reason why I feel like I didn't have a support system on campus is because it was because of the degree to which sexual assault and sexual harassment and sexism is such like a don't ask, don't tell sort of issue, and that a lot of people know it's happening, but when you speak out about it, you're risking a lot. You're risking probably your social reputation, maybe some friendships, and also the very fact that it's such a close-knit community and so many friend groups are overlapped. If you're to go against the status quo, you're not just losing your immediate friend group, you could be losing a lot of people. And also, if you speak out and you want to be anonymous or you want your assault to be kept to a certain number of people, it's probably not going to happen because of how gossipy the campus is, as well as the fact that these things aren't taken seriously in themselves. So, long story short, I do not feel like I had a support system on campus at all. Not to mention the fact that mental health support was lacking on campus. Like, there was this campus psychologist who was on infrequently, and from whom I've heard from other people that they were problematic and made offhand sexist or homophobic comments. I can't confirm that, but I just have heard from students who went that it wasn't a very supportive or safe experience. And of course there was SOS, which I was a member of, but we were untrained students just trying to do our best with the little resources we had. We were well intentioned, but we were not trained. We didn't have the expertise and the resources we needed to really support students. Having this open discussion would be especially impactful on our campus because of the small size and because of how much these sort of community linkages have a very tangible impact. Like, if just a fraction of our campus really committed themselves to being allies of sexual assault survivors, meaning that they provided active support to survivors in a non-judgmental in a way, that they would stand up and intervene in moments like during a party or club night where something non-consensual could be happening, if they held accountable people around them that they knew had assaulted or harassed, and that they believed survivors when they said that they were assaulted or harassed, that would make a huge difference. And that's just if there was just a fraction, like a fourth of students who were actively committed to being an ally. But unfortunately, most people on campus fall into categories of being ignorant on the issue. Like, I don't see it, I don't know about sexual assault, it wouldn't happen here, they're my friends, they could never do such a thing. They fall into categories of passive acknowledgement, where you know it's happening, but you're not going to say anything because you don't want to start a confrontation. You're more concerned with your own sense of comfort and social status than the physical protection of other people. And then the last category being people who actually assault and harass, which I think, or people that enable it, meaning you can do it yourself, you can actually harass or assault someone yourself, or you continue to be friends and not acknowledge people who do that, you're enabling them. Or you see it happening, and you just kind of turn away or think like, oh, they're drunk, or oh yeah, like he's just kind of flirty. I'd say those three categories would characterize the majority of people on our campus. And I think what I would want to tell those friends who continue being friends with the person who assaulted me without, at least to my knowledge, holding them accountable for assaulting me, I want to tell them that maybe you're doing it because you want to avoid a difficult conversation, or because you would like to trust that this mutual friend has changed their ways, but to me and to many other to many other survivors who are in this position of seeing their friends continuing to be friends with the person that abused them, it feels like a slap in the face. It feels like my pain, my trauma does not matter to you enough to even have a conversation, that your sense of comfort and sort of blind ignorance is more important to you than my sense of trust in our friendship, and that you don't really care about survivors. You don't care about being an ally to sexual assault survivors. And it's been painful to see that. It's made me question who are my real friends, because I thought that the person who assaulted me was my friend to begin with. But after having more time to think about it and time to heal, I'm realizing that I wouldn't even want to be super close friends with someone who didn't actually care about me. So it's sort of shown me more like who my real friends are. I think one of the most important things, I think, or one of the biggest problems when we talk about sexual assault survivors coming forward with their stories, like, I remember when the Me Too movement was first taking off, and like we even had a sort of debate on campus led by some male students who were in the year above me. And the debate was sort of about like Me Too and like Harvey Weinstein and like the merits of like delegitimizing Weinstein's entire career on the basis of, you know, some sexual assault allegations. Like, that's how it was being spoken about. And a big rebuttal from like these primarily the main students who were like taking up most of the space during this debate. And I remember this debate pretty vividly because it was soon after my own sexual assault, and so to be in such a space where survivors weren't being listened to and that rapists were being sort of exonerated was extremely uncomfortable for me. So I remember it. And there's a lot of questions being thrown around like, well, why didn't they speak up earlier? You know, like, why? Like, basically trying to cut down the merits of these allegations and the honesty of these allegations on the grounds that they came like decades later. But instead of asking like, why did they take so long to come forward, and maybe even blaming them for taking so long, I think the much more important question to be asking is like, what silenced them for this long? Like, what threats, what factors were there to make someone feel unsafe in talking about an injustice that was done upon them? So to people who have not experienced sexual assault firsthand and thus can be allies or complicit bystanders, I would really, really encourage you, for many reasons, to stand as an ally with people who are assaulted. The reasons being, one, I can almost guarantee that someone in your life, probably a female identifying person, has been sexually assaulted. Your mother, your sister, your girlfriend, like your friends, your professor. You definitely know someone who has been sexually assaulted. Maybe they haven't told you, or maybe they won't even tell you if you ask them because they're not ready to talk about it. But you surely know someone who has been assaulted. And also, like, you could, I hope it's not the case, but like with how pervasive sexual assault is, like, there's a chance that you might be sexually assaulted too down the line. And so those are just some big reasons like why you should care about this, because it affects everyone indirectly or directly down the line. And by being an ally, I would implore you to think critically, question critically the way you hear allegations being spoken about. When you hear someone's description of like what they were wearing or like who they were with in like a conversation about like someone being assaulted, ask yourself, why are we talking about what they were wearing? Why are we talking about whether or not, like, if they had hooked up with that person before they were raped by them? It doesn't matter. And I think once you start to question critically and start to dismantle ideas of rape culture and misogyny, you'll much better be able to be an ally, but also just have a less biased view of the issue, because being an ally is not like a politicized bias. No, like the idea we have of rape culture as it is, like, that's what's politicized, that's what's biased, that we don't see the facts, that we just pick and choose what we want to like prosecute someone according to, or like judge someone's like character, or like how much they did or did not deserve to be assaulted by like what they were wearing, or like if they had been drinking. So yeah, it's just better for you to like have a more well-rounded understanding of such a big societal issue by being an ally.
And so, like, really thank you guys, because this for me is like a big step in overcoming that trauma, because now I think I'll have like way less guilt, because I felt so guilty for not speaking out, like if that person had assaulted other people. So no, like I think the real thank you to you guys, because it's really gonna help me like feel okay with what happened.
But really thank you for like letting us share your story.
Yeah. And then thank you for participating in this episode. Like, we're really happy that you're on it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I experienced a form of sexual harassment at Sciencespo at a party at the start of the year. All students, as always, had a little much to drink, including myself, and we were all dancing together. Song after song came on, and we continued to dance and have a great time.
To be honest, I don't know what to make of it, because our relationship was consensual, but it didn't start consensually. He made a move and I didn't react for a few minutes, and in those few minutes, I was scared.
He and I made plans to cook lunch together at my place. He was nice. He seemed interested in me. I was interested in him too, but I was still kind of cautious. After eating, he sat down on my bed, and I stood in front of him. He reached me out and grabbed my leg and told me I was kind of chubby. I laughed it off. He then grabbed my leg again and pulled me down to kiss me. I don't know what flipped in that second, but certainly I really didn't want that to be happening.
I don't know if it really counts as harassment to a certain scale. However, I've had uncomfortable situations in Sciencespo, especially during parties. Once, a certain individual just grabbed at my butt and laughed in one party. Unnecessary, uncomfortable touching, etc.
At one point in the night, I was dancing in a circle with some other students. The guy standing opposite me started to make eye contact, but I tried to avoid his eye contact and continued to dance. Once again, I tried to ignore and avoid this, but within the next 2 minutes, he started to grope me and I almost froze. I ignored this again and tried to keep dancing as if nothing had happened, but it continued.
There were times we had sex and I didn't want to do something, and sometimes he wouldn't respect that and do it or be upset.
I tried pushing him off a couple of times, but he kept making a move. I even tried landing myself while he had took me trapped on the back underneath him, but he didn't listen.
Recently, while almost unconscious, a certain individual kissed me without consent, and it really left me shocked and angry.
Without any acknowledgement or consent from myself, he launched himself onto me and forced his tongue down my throat. I pushed him away as quickly as possible, terrified that it was going to escalate further. I immediately left the party and went home. I tried to blame this event on the fact that everyone had too much to drink and that it was nothing serious. But I couldn't think straight and stayed silent for a while.
After about 5 minutes of this, I finally got really scared and pushed him off of me as hard as I could and told him, I don't want this. I think the worst part was after that, because I didn't kick him out or do anything, I started to apologize him and try to keep the mood light. I was weak and I had myself for that.
I really did not want to make any of this a big deal because of the many conflicts and misunderstanding it can create. However, it still bothers me every day that I have to go through this experience even in an environment I'm supposed to feel safe and protected. The only coping mechanism I've found is talking to my friends. and trying to forget, and of course being more careful to avoid these certain individuals at events, etc. I would like to remain anonymous. However, I would love for my story to be heard, as if they hear the story, these individuals will know I've talked it, and they will fucking think twice before doing anything else again to anyone.
I reach out to the people around me. I have the best friend in the whole world, and they comforted and advised me. I also wrote out my experience and what I was feeling, which helped me look at it from a more objective point of view and understand myself better. We share a lot of the same friends. I don't want to start a war.
This is a message for anyone who has experienced sexual harassment or assault. While this is always definitely easier said than done, I hope that victims find comfort in speaking with someone about their experiences. Having the ability to talk to someone is not only part of raising awareness about the issue, but also oftentimes relieves a small amount of the burden that victims carry. Find someone you trust and feel comfortable talking to. It makes a huge difference, and also played an important role in acting as a coping mechanism for myself.
To me, I still don't know if this even qualifies as sexual assault, but is it important to have specific consent? It's hard to say, but one of the most difficult parts of this whole experience was fear of what other people would think about me. Thank you for raising awareness about it.
The other message to people who have been, who are survivors of sexual assault like myself, I believe you. I didn't believe myself for a really long time, for over 2 years, and I felt at times that I wasn't believed by other people, but at least between us, between people who know what this feels like, we can believe each other and we can uplift each other and protect each other. It's really hard, I know, because I went through myself and sometimes I still struggle with it, but if you're able to seek support around you, whether from like mental health professionals or sexual violence like hotlines or like centers or like just a good friend group, I really encourage you to do so, because it's sort of like there's two sides to like a good side and like a bad side to the fact that this happens so much. I mean, the bad side being that people are sexually assaulted very often, but the sort of like the side which can bolster solidarity is that a lot of people know what you're going through. And so because of that, I would really encourage you to try to find help in other people, because if I hadn't done that, like I don't know how I would have gotten through the trauma that I was going through. And lastly, I would say, this is my opinion, not something that everyone would agree with, but after like a lot of reflections on sexual assault on a more societal level and not just like my individual experiences, I would say that if you're in a position where your physical safety or like emotional safety isn't going to be jeopardized by speaking out about your sexual assault, I think that there's a lot of power and reason for you to do so, because just like I described the phenomenon of a passive bystander, we can be passive bystanders to the problem too. I really feared after not speaking out about my sexual assaults for 2 years that that person had maybe assaulted other people, and that if I had spoken up sooner, maybe I would have stopped them. And that guilt that I sat with was really overwhelming, and I never want to have that guilt again, to have some form of complicity in someone else's trauma. And so for that reason, I would really encourage speaking out. But also, because there are so many people for whom speaking out could mean like death or violence or just terrible things, for those of us who can speak out, I think we have a responsibility to speak out, not just for ourselves, but for them. It's not just a matter of taking back something that is yours, like your voice, your story. It's about taking something back that is ours, that is a collective trauma and a collective suffering, even though, of course, our individual experiences are very distinct and deserve to be handled with individualized attention. But there's so much about this issue that is common, like universally. And because of those reasons, I think speaking out has a lot of value.